The rain was soft at first, barely more than mist, clinging to the windows of the black SUV like fragile thoughts that didn't want to be wiped away. But it grew heavier, drumming against the roof in a rhythm that mimicked the chaos in his chest. Nicholas Grayson sat in the driver's seat, unmoving, his knuckles white around the steering wheel. He hadn't planned to stop. He hadn't planned to feel. And yet, there she was, at the edge of the sidewalk, soaking wet, hunched over, her wedding dress clinging to her like sorrow itself. At first, he couldn't tell what color the dress had been. Ivory, maybe. Or cream. Now it was just soaked through, dragging behind her in puddles, stained with mud and rejection. Her shoes were gone. Her bouquet lay crushed beside a trash bin. But the veil still clung to her shoulder like it, too, refused to let go of the dream. In the back seat, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, leaned forward and tapped the glass with one small finger. "Daddy," she whispered, "she looks like someone who forgot how to breathe." Her voice cracked like a porcelain cup dropped on tile. Nicholas turned to her, unsure what to say. He hadn't answered a question like that in years. He looked again. The woman hadn't moved. She sat curled near a closed shop, arms wrapped around herself as if that could keep the world out. People walked past. A man glanced at her and kept moving. A couple crossed the street to avoid the sight of her. But Lily didn't look away. "She looks like Mommy did that day," she whispered again. Nicholas swallowed hard. It had been 3 years since his wife died. 3 years since the hospital room fell into a silence so absolute he hadn't heard music since. But now, here in the middle of a city too loud to care, he heard something again. It was small, soft, but real. Like a thread pulling him toward someone else's sadness. He opened the door. The woman flinched when he approached. Her mascara had bled into her cheeks. Her lips were cracked. Her hands clutched the hem of her dress so tightly her knuckles looked bruised. She didn't look up. "I'm not trying to bother you," he said, his voice low, careful. "But it's cold. And you're alone." She didn't answer. Just shook her head, almost imperceptibly. He took off his coat, held it out. She hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers. She still didn't look up. "I'm Nicholas," he said. "That's my daughter, Lily." From the car, the little girl waved. The woman blinked. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. "I'm not asking anything from you," Nicholas added. "Just, it's raining. And I think maybe you shouldn't be sitting here tonight." She finally looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her face, beautiful beneath the ruin, was twisted with something deeper than grief. It was the look of someone who no longer believed the world had a place for them. Someone who'd been told, perhaps in front of 100 people, that she was unworthy of love because of the body she lived in. And Nicholas, standing there in his tailored suit, his polished shoes already soaked, realized with a strange clarity that he knew that feeling. Not in the same form. But in the quiet, cruel way the world strips you of dignity and leaves you outside in the rain with nothing but silence and shame. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The woman hesitated. Then, "Claire." Just that. Claire. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. The torn train of her gown, the smudged eyeliner, the way her shoulders shook with every silent breath, those were all the answers he needed. "Would you come sit with us?" he asked. "Just, to get warm. Then you can tell me to go to hell if you want." Claire hesitated, then stood. When she tried to walk, the soaked dress tangled around her legs. Nicholas offered his arm. She didn't take it. But she walked beside him anyway. Lily scooted over immediately when the door opened. "Hi," she said, holding out a small blanket from the back seat. "You can have this." "I don't mind." Claire looked at the girl, and something in her face cracked. Not fully. Not yet. But it shifted. She took the blanket like it weighed 100 pounds. "Thank you," she whispered. Nicholas adjusted the heat. Claire sat quietly, her hands curled around herself, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Lily leaned her head against the window again. "Do you want to hear something funny?" she asked, glancing toward Claire. "Daddy says we're not supposed to talk to strangers. But sometimes, strangers are the only ones who don't lie." Claire laughed, barely. But it was a sound. And it wasn't broken. Nicholas glanced at her in the mirror. "You okay?" She shook her head. But this time, she whispered, "Not yet." That was the beginning. The moment that wouldn't make sense until far later, when names and timelines unraveled, when secrets long buried floated back to the surface, gasping for air. Back then, Nicholas didn't know who she was. What she'd survived. What she had left behind. All he knew was this: a woman had been thrown away like she didn't matter. And maybe, just maybe, he could be the one to remind her she did. Even if he had to remind himself first. 6 years earlier, he wasn't a man broken by silence. He was just another name on a business magazine cover, Nicholas Grayson, the youngest self-made CEO to build a luxury tech empire from scratch. Everything he touched turned into market gold. His voice could sway a boardroom. His presence, a calculated storm, controlled, polished, and always 5 steps ahead. People feared him, envied him. But no one knew him. And that's how he preferred it. Until that one evening in early spring, when the wind still carried winter's leftover bite and cherry blossoms hadn't yet dared to bloom. He'd been invited, rather unwillingly, to attend his cousin's extravagant engagement party at a boutique winery just outside the city. Nicholas had no interest in small talk or watching strangers toast to a love he didn't believe in. But he went anyway, out of obligation. Out of boredom. Maybe both. He arrived late, stepping into a room saturated with laughter and champagne, where glitter clung to the air and string lights hung like promises no one intended to keep. His custom charcoal suit, pressed with surgical precision, barely stood out among the glittering gowns and designer tuxedos. But his expression, detached, almost cold, made a few heads turn anyway. He wasn't meant to meet her. But fate, that meddling thing dressed in coincidence, made sure they collided. She wasn't part of the party. Not really. Just a last-minute server called in to replace someone who'd quit mid-shift. Her name tag read Eva, slightly crooked on her plain black blouse. Her bun was loose, a wisp of hair clinging to her cheek, and there was a small tear on the hem of her apron she hadn't noticed. She was balancing a tray of crystal flutes when someone nudged her shoulder mid-turn. The tray tilted. Liquid shimmered midair. Nicholas caught it. Fast. His hand steady beneath hers. The glasses didn't fall. But their eyes met, and something did. It wasn't love. That would have been too easy. It was recognition. As if some part of him, buried deep beneath the suits and billion-dollar contracts, remembered what it felt like to look at someone who hadn't been trained to hide their soul behind a smile. "Careful," he said, his voice lower than she expected. She blinked. Nodded. "Sorry, sir." He didn't let go of the tray. Not immediately. His fingers brushed hers. Something flickered between them, too brief to name. Then it passed. He stepped back. She disappeared into the crowd. But he watched her. Not intentionally. At first. She moved with quiet grace, slipping between guests, refilling drinks, dodging slurred compliments. She didn't try to belong. She didn't pretend to smile when her feet ached. And when she thought no one was looking, she leaned against a pillar near the back, stealing a sip of water, whispering something to herself. He had no reason to care. But he listened anyway. "Almost done, Eva," she whispered. "One more hour." Eva. The name stayed with him. He should have left after the toast. That was the plan. But he stayed. He kept his distance. Yet every time her shadow passed near, he found himself holding his breath. He didn't know why. Later, when the party thinned and the guests grew louder, someone spilled red wine across the ivory tablecloth near the dessert station. Eva rushed over with napkins. Nicholas saw it before it happened, a carelessly swung arm, a heel catching a cable, and then her knees buckled, tray in hand, a gasp escaping her lips. He moved. Faster than he'd ever moved in a boardroom. He caught her again. This time, there were no glasses to save. Just her. Just his hand curled around her wrist, steadying her as she caught her balance. Their eyes locked again. Longer now. Twice in one night, he said. Do you always fall into people's arms this way? She gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Only when they insist on standing where I need to be. He smiled. Actually smiled. A real one. Then stay, he said. It surprised them both. I mean, he added quickly, for a drink. When your shift's over. She hesitated. Her eyes searched his face, uncertain whether this was a joke or a trick. Why? She asked softly. He didn't have a real answer. Only the truth. Because I'd like to know what kind of woman talks to herself in a room full of people and doesn't bother to pretend. She didn't say yes. Not then. But he saw the ghost of a maybe in her eyes. And when the night ended, and she stepped outside into the cool night air, she found him leaning against his car, 2 cups of takeout coffee in hand, not champagne. They sat on the stone steps behind the vineyard, the music fading behind them, city lights in the distance like forgotten promises. She told him about her brother. Her double shifts. Her dream to one day open a tiny bakery where no one felt out of place no matter how they looked or what they wore. A place for misfits and late-night coffee. He didn't tell her much. Just that he hadn't laughed like that in years. When dawn bled across the horizon, she stood. I don't do rich men, she said, half smiling. I don't do anyone, he replied. And somehow, that made sense. They parted without exchanging numbers. But she left behind a napkin. One scribbled word. Start. He kept it. Pressed between pages of a leather notebook he never opened again. Not until years later, when her face returned, not in laughter or clumsiness, but in pain, soaked in rain, abandoned in a wedding dress on the side of a road. The air in the small apartment always carried a faint scent of lavender and fabric softener, but that night, it felt stale. The kind of stillness that settled in spaces that had been too quiet for too long. Claire stood barefoot on the tiled floor, staring at the closed window, its glass fogged from the warmth inside. Her wedding dress had been cleaned and folded, tucked inside a faded suitcase beneath her bed, out of sight, but never truly out of mind. She hadn't returned to her parents' house after that day. Not because she wasn't welcome. But because her mother's silence in that chapel, her averted eyes and clenched hands, had spoken louder than the priest ever could. Claire had called a cab, paid in cash, and given the driver the address of a neighborhood she'd only visited once. A friend of a friend had a room. She said Claire could stay. Just for a little while. That was 6 months ago. The job at the bakery came after. Not glamorous, not secure, but it paid enough to cover rent and instant noodles. And on good days, she could steal a few cupcakes that didn't sell. She never looked in the mirror before leaving for work. The reflection wasn't cruel, it was just tired of being argued with. Her face hadn't changed. Just her eyes. They no longer hoped anyone might love her for more than a moment. Each morning started the same. Claire woke before dawn, tied her hair into a bun that never held, and walked the 6 blocks to the bakery. She liked the quiet of the streets before the city came alive. She liked the way the morning air made her feel invisible. Safe in solitude. She didn't mind frosting cupcakes for hours. Or wiping the counters clean until they sparkled. It kept her hands busy, kept her mind from drifting back to the image of guests shifting in their seats at the altar, the sound of someone coughing to break the silence after Mark said, "I can't do this." It wasn't just the words that gutted her. It was the ease with which he said them. Like she was an old jacket that no longer fit. Like he was returning something defective. No apology. Just a final look, followed by the slap of his polished shoes walking away. Claire had stood there, heart still trying to beat through the hole he left behind. That memory lived just beneath her skin. Some days, she'd scratch at her wrist and not know why until she realized she was trying to rub away the echo of that moment. But there was something else now. Something new. Something she didn't dare name. A man. A child. A car ride she hadn't expected. A warmth she hadn't earned. Nicholas and Lily. It had been 3 days since the night she sat in the rain. 3 days since he placed a coat around her shoulders without pity. He hadn't asked questions. Hadn't tried to fix her. Just sat beside her like he knew what it meant to be broken and still breathing. Claire hadn't returned his coat. It hung by her door, clean now, but she hadn't brought herself to fold it. It felt like a promise. A small one. But enough to let her believe that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. That night, she baked a batch of cinnamon rolls, something soft, sweet, and warm. Something she hadn't made in years. She wrapped 4 of them in wax paper, tied the bundle with a bit of string, and stared at it for a long time. Then she tucked it into her bag and told herself it wasn't a gift. Just a thank you. She didn't have his address. But she remembered the direction the SUV turned that night. And sometimes, all you need is a direction and a reason. The receptionist at Carter Holdings looked at her with polite confusion. Claire shifted her weight, trying not to sweat through her dress. She hadn't worn it in months, the navy one with the buttons that strained slightly at her chest, but it was the nicest thing she owned. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked. "No," Claire said softly. I'm returning something. For Mr. Grayson." The woman narrowed her eyes. Claire braced herself. But instead, she picked up the phone and dialed. After a pause, she said, "There's someone here for you. Says she has something of yours." A moment later, she nodded toward the elevators. 16th floor. Claire clutched the package tighter. The elevator was lined with mirrors. She tried not to look at herself. She failed. She looked and immediately wished she hadn't. There was nothing wrong with her reflection. But it still felt like someone she used to be. Someone who believed love wasn't measured by inches or pounds. When the doors opened, Nicholas was already standing in the hallway. He hadn't changed much. Still tailored. Still reserved. But his eyes softened when he saw her. Not the way people soften out of obligation. But the way people do when they're surprised to see you, and relieved you came anyway. "I wanted to return your coat," she said, offering the bundle instead. Nicholas looked at the package, then at her. "I'm glad you came." Claire's breath caught. She didn't know why. Maybe because no one had said that to her in a long, long time. He didn't ask what was inside. He just gestured to the small lounge by the glass windows. "Do you have time for coffee?" Claire hesitated. But then she followed him anyway. There, seated on opposite ends of a long gray sofa, Nicholas asked her about the bakery. About cinnamon rolls. About how she learned to cook. She told him about her aunt's tiny kitchen in Brooklyn. About learning to stir batter before she learned to spell. About burning the first 3 batches and crying like the whole world had collapsed. He laughed. Not loud. But real. When the meeting ended, he walked her to the elevator. She looked down at the floor. "I'm not someone people bring cinnamon rolls to," he said suddenly. Claire looked up. "Why not?" Nicholas shrugged. "Too busy. Too cold." Too rich. Claire smiled. Just a little. Maybe you've just been giving people the wrong recipe. The elevator chimed. Before the doors closed, she looked at him and said, "Thanks for not driving away." He didn't answer. Just watched her disappear behind silver doors. And in the silence that followed, he realized her name had already carved itself into the quiet corners of his memory. Claire. Like something familiar he couldn't quite place. Yet. The next morning, the sun filtered through the blinds of Nicholas Grayson's penthouse office, painting long shadows across his desk. He stared at the half-empty coffee mug beside him, the same one Claire had sipped from yesterday, her lipstick still faintly visible on the rim. He hadn't wiped it off. Couldn't. Wouldn't. It felt absurd, sentimental even, but something about that lipstick mark made the sterile office feel human. He hadn't slept well. Not from stress or work, but from the echo of her voice in his head. The way she'd said, "Thanks for not driving away." He kept thinking about it. Over and over. As if those 6 words were less about him, and more about the ache she carried so quietly. That ache had a shape now. A name. Claire. Downstairs, Claire pushed open the bakery door, the bell chiming its usual dull welcome. Her hands were raw from scrubbing trays. Her knees ached from crouching in the tiny fridge. But none of that mattered because her heart had been strangely lighter since yesterday. She wasn't stupid. She knew men like Nicholas didn't just befriend women like her. Especially not ones with stretch marks and a trail of broken promises behind them. But still, he hadn't looked away. He hadn't looked through her. He looked at her. Like she wasn't invisible. By mid-morning, she was mixing batter when her boss tapped her on the shoulder and handed her a brown envelope. No return address. Just her name, written neatly across the front. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside, a single note, lunch. No pressure. Just company. N. There was no phone number. No instructions. Just that. Claire blinked back the strange sting of tears and tucked the note into her apron. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Something in her heart already had. When she arrived at the restaurant he'd mentioned in the note, an Italian place tucked between 2 office buildings, he was already there. Standing near the hostess, not seated like a man used to being waited on. When he saw her, he smiled. Not the practiced smile he wore in board meetings, but one that unfolded slowly, like he wasn't sure how to smile until now. Claire felt the air shift the moment she stepped closer. He was taller than she remembered. Broader, too. But it was his eyes that made her nervous. Not because they judged her. But because they didn't. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be looked at like she mattered. They didn't talk much during the meal. Just small things. Favorite foods. Bad dates. Childhood memories wrapped in laughter and awkward silences. At one point, Nicholas asked, "What do you really want to do?" Claire paused. Then answered, "Open a little cafe. With pink walls. And bad wallpaper. But good bread." She looked down at her plate. "Stupid dream, I know." Nicholas shook his head. "It's not stupid. It sounds like home." Her heart beat in her ears. He didn't say, "That's cute." Or, "You should think smaller." He said it sounded like home. When they stepped outside, the wind had picked up. Nicholas offered her his coat again. She hesitated. "You keep lending me things." "I don't mind," he said. Claire smiled. "Someday I might not give them back." "I'm counting on it," he replied. She walked away before he could see how much that sentence had undone her. That night, Claire sat at the edge of her bed, holding the coat close, not because she was cold, but because it still smelled like cedar and winter and safety. She hadn't told him everything. About the wedding. The humiliation. The photos she deleted from her phone but couldn't delete from her soul. About the way her mother stopped calling. About how she stood in front of the mirror that day and almost didn't walk down the aisle, not because she doubted her love, but because she doubted her worth. And yet, here she was, months later, holding the coat of a man who looked at her like the world hadn't failed her yet. At his office, Nicholas sat staring at the screen, but his mind was miles away. He kept thinking of the way she talked about pink walls and bread and wallpaper. He wanted to ask her more. Not because he needed to know, but because he wanted to remember her answers. To memorize them. Then he did something rare. Something he hadn't done in years. He opened a blank document. And typed. Pink walls. Bad wallpaper. Good bread. Claire's Cafe. He stared at the words, and for the first time in a decade, the future didn't feel so hollow. The next week, Claire received another note. This time slipped into her locker at work. Would you join me for a walk? No pressure. Just steps. She smiled. This man. With his strange little invitations. No demands. Just space to breathe. They walked through the park. The leaves had started turning. Gold and red and orange. The kind of day that tasted like apple cider and endings. She told him about her dog from childhood. He told her about his daughter. Claire stopped. I didn't know you had a daughter. I did, he said quietly. For 2 hours. She didn't make it. She didn't ask more. Just stood still as the wind pulled at her scarf. I'm sorry, she said. Me too. They sat on a bench and watched people pass. Children laughing. Old men feeding birds. A woman jogging with a baby strapped to her chest. Life moving around them. And yet, in that silence, they shared something fragile. The ache of what could have been. Claire finally asked, why me? Nicholas didn't answer immediately. Because when you cried in the rain, you didn't hide. You didn't apologize. And somehow, that made me feel less alone. She didn't know what to say. So she didn't say anything. But that night, she wrote her first recipe in a new notebook. On the cover, she scribbled, for those who stayed. And in the first line, cinnamon rolls. Inspired by the man who didn't drive away. She looked at her reflection in the window, soft, unsure, a little worn. But for the first time in a long time, she whispered to herself. I might be worth staying for. And somewhere, in another part of the city, Nicholas Grayson stared at the empty passenger seat beside him. And wondered what it would take for her to ride beside him, not just in silence. But in a future that neither of them had dared believe in, until now. The first time she walked into his building not as a stranger but as a guest, Claire almost turned around. The glass doors loomed like a wall, sleek and perfect, reflecting a version of herself she didn't quite recognize. She tugged at the hem of her cardigan, too plain. Her shoes, too worn. The receptionist smiled like she didn't notice. But Claire noticed everything. Every polished tile. Every suit walking past her like she didn't belong. Still, she took the elevator to the top floor, carrying a box of cupcakes she had baked that morning, each one hand-piped with swirls of frosting in pale pastels. Nicholas had asked her to bring something she liked. She wasn't sure if he meant dessert or herself. When the elevator doors opened, he was already standing there. As if he'd been waiting the entire time. He didn't wear a tie that day. Just a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, the top button undone. He looked less like the man who ruled the city's financial empire, and more like someone who could ask if she'd eaten, if her walk to the station was okay, if her morning was calm. Hi, he said, and just like that, the anxiety ebbed. She handed him the box, shyly. I didn't know your favorite. He took it carefully, like she was handing him something delicate. Anything made by you is already my favorite. Her cheeks warmed. They sat in the small lounge by the window wall. The skyline stretched out behind him like a kingdom he owned, but he didn't look at it once. His eyes stayed on her. She spoke first. "This place is beautiful. But I feel like I shouldn't even breathe here." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Funny. I feel like I've only started breathing since you first walked in." Claire's laugh was soft, disbelieving, as she looked down at her hands. She was still wearing the same bracelet. The one with the single silver heart. It had cost $5. But now, somehow, it meant more than any diamond. "I've been thinking," Nicholas said after a pause, "about how easy it is to lose years. One missed call. One bad assumption. One decision not to turn around." Claire met his gaze. "What are you trying to say?" He hesitated. I think I've spent a lot of time walking past people who were quietly drowning. And then one day, I saw you, sitting in the rain, and it was like the world finally made a sound I couldn't ignore." She looked away. "Claire," he said gently. "You don't have to say anything. But I do." And then, slowly, like unveiling a wound too old to bleed, he spoke of the night he watched her cry in front of that closed shop. Of how his son had pointed and said, "She looks like Mommy did." Of how something inside him had shattered, and rebuilt itself, without her knowing. Claire didn't interrupt. She let his words settle into the spaces of her that still ached. And when he finished, she whispered, "I almost didn't show up today." "Why?" "Because the last man who said he cared left me standing in a white dress in front of 200 people." Nicholas inhaled sharply. "I was too fat for him," she continued. "Too much. Too big. Too loud. Too visible." He closed his eyes. "I didn't think anyone would ever look at me without seeing that shame." Nicholas reached across the small table and took her hand, tentative at first, but then firmer, grounding. "You were never too much. They were just too small to hold what you carried." Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. The silence after that felt sacred. Then he smiled gently. "So, will you let me be the one to carry something for once?" She stared at him. "Like what?" He shrugged, feigning casual. "Maybe, your cupcake box next time." She laughed then. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that didn't apologize for being too loud. The kind of laugh she hadn't heard from herself in years. And outside, the sky began to soften. Later, when she left the building, Nicholas walked her down himself. Past assistants who looked confused. Past executives who whispered. He didn't care. She saw it in the way he didn't flinch when people stared. And she, for once, let them stare. She got to the sidewalk and turned to him. "You know, I still don't believe this is real, right?" "Then let me prove it," he said. "How?" "Cupcakes tomorrow. My place. Dinner after." Her lips curved. "You're relentless." "I'm consistent," he corrected. "And also kind of addicted to lemon frosting." She rolled her eyes. "Fine. But only because I already baked extra." He watched her go, hands in his pockets, heart heavier and lighter all at once. That night, Nicholas sat with his son, reading a bedtime story. Caleb was quiet, unusually so. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Dad, is that lady going to come over again?" Nicholas smiled. "Would you like her to?" Caleb nodded. "She made the house smell like bread and hugs." Nicholas laughed. "Yeah. I noticed that too." "Is she sad?" "A little," he said honestly. "Are you going to make her happy?" Nicholas thought for a moment. "I'd like to try." Caleb looked thoughtful. "Then don't mess it up, okay? I'll do my best." The boy curled into his blanket. She feels like someone we were waiting for. Nicholas blinked. Then walked out of the room, stood in the hallway, and closed his eyes. Waiting. That was exactly what it had felt like. All this time, like the story hadn't started until the moment he didn't drive away. And now, maybe, just maybe, it was time to turn the page. The apartment smelled like cardamom and sugar when Claire stepped through the door. It wasn't her recipe, but Nicholas had tried. He stood by the counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, flour dusting the front of his dark sweater, a wooden spoon in one hand, and an expression that screamed he had no idea what he was doing. Claire laughed before she could stop herself. "You're not supposed to cook the whole spice jar." He looked up, surprised, then grinned. "You caught me in the middle of a very serious experiment." "You mean, arson?" she teased. "Bold of you to assume this kitchen is still flammable." They laughed, awkwardly at first, then easier, like two people remembering what it felt like to be at home without being judged. Nicholas gestured to the small table he had set near the window. There were two mismatched plates, a folded cloth napkin, and a bottle of water with slices of lemon floating inside like it had come from a spa. "You really tried," she said softly. "I really am," he replied. The meal was forgettable, too salty, a little burnt, but neither of them cared. They talked, gently poking through the surface of things. Claire told him about her part-time job at a second-hand bookstore, about her dream of one day opening a cafe where people could pay what they could. Nicholas confessed he still couldn't remember the last time someone had asked how he was doing without expecting something in return. She looked at him carefully, trying to imagine the man who lived here before her. It was a clean space, too clean, almost clinical, but as the evening wore on, she started noticing signs of softness. A kid's drawing on the fridge. A photograph tucked behind a magnet shaped like a panda. A coaster with a faint coffee ring, like someone used to sit here often and never bothered to wipe it away. "Do you cook for him?" Claire asked. "Sometimes. Mostly grilled cheese or breakfast for dinner. Caleb's a simple man with very serious sandwich expectations." Claire smiled. "He's sweet. He's everything." Silence stretched for a beat before Nicholas added, "He asked about you again." "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if you were staying." Claire's heart clenched in her chest. "And what did you tell him?" "I said I hoped so. But it wasn't up to me." Their eyes met across the table. And for a moment, it felt like nothing else existed. Not the past. Not the doubts. Not the cruel memory of her in a rain-soaked wedding dress or the silence that followed her longest night. Later, Nicholas walked her to the door. As she slipped her coat on, her bracelet caught the edge of the sleeve. A small silver heart charm dangled from it. He froze. "I've seen that before," he said. Claire's hand paused. "I don't know where, but I have." She tucked the charm beneath her sleeve quickly. "Lots of people have these." "Not exactly that one," he murmured. She forced a smile. "It's old." "Doesn't matter." But it did. She could feel the heat crawling up her neck as she stepped out into the hall, heart hammering, wondering if this was the moment everything would come undone. He didn't stop her. But he didn't look away either. The next day, Claire showed up at the office with a small box of handmade lemon bars. The receptionist greeted her like an old friend now. Nicholas's assistant, Julia, gave her a knowing smile and said, "He's in the lounge. He's been weirdly calm all morning." "That's how I knew you'd come." Claire knocked softly and pushed the door open. He was sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee in his hands, staring at the skyline. "You came. You look surprised." "I'm terrified," he admitted. She set the box on the table and sat beside him. "Why?" she asked. "Because, this feels like the start of something. And that means there's something I could lose." Claire's breath caught. He looked so serious, so open, like someone trying to hand her his heart without wrapping paper. "I know what that feels like," she whispered. "Losing something before you even have a chance to hold it." They sat there, side by side, not speaking, not touching. But the distance between them had never been smaller. And then he asked, so quietly she almost missed it, "Do you believe in déjà vu?" She turned to him. "Why?" "Because sometimes when I look at you, I swear I've met you before." Her pulse thudded against her skin. But she didn't lie. She didn't tell the truth either. She just said, "Maybe in another life." That night, Claire sat by her window with a journal on her lap. She hadn't written in it for years. The last entry was from a week before her wedding, back when she still believed the world was simple and kindness guaranteed love in return. Now, she wrote one sentence. "I think I'm beginning again, but I'm afraid he won't remember the first time." Downstairs, Nicholas was pacing in his living room. He pulled out a worn envelope from his desk drawer, a note he had found years ago tucked under a windshield wiper, right after a night he barely remembered but never forgot the feeling of. It had only said one thing. "If you remember the rain, then maybe you remember me." He had never known what to do with it. Until now. And he wasn't sure yet what it meant. But his heart was beginning to whisper a truth he wasn't ready to say out loud. He had met her before. And he had walked away. Only this time, he wouldn't make the same mistake. Nicholas didn't sleep that night. He tried. He lay still in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant rhythm of the city pulsing outside his window. But his mind wouldn't stop replaying the flash of silver on Claire's wrist, the heart-shaped charm, the way she tucked it quickly away like a secret. Something about it clawed at his memory, fragile but relentless. It wasn't the first time she'd unsettled him. There was her laugh, soft and untrained like someone who hadn't used it much lately. The way she pronounced lemon with a faint curl in her tone. The way she wiped her hands on her apron with a double flick, just like someone he once knew. Someone who once looked at him through a fogged cafe window and mouthed the words, "I'll wait." He sat up and opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside was a cigar box, sealed with a rubber band, old and faded from the years. He hadn't opened it in a long time. Inside were scraps from a version of himself he no longer claimed. A receipt from a bakery he'd stumbled into during a rainstorm 6 years ago. A napkin with smeared writing, her handwriting. A photo of her, blurry, laughing, framed in golden light. Her name wasn't Claire back then. It was Eliza. He hadn't said it out loud in years. Now it echoed like thunder. The next morning, he showed up to the office early. Earlier than even the cleaning crew. He paced the length of his glass-walled conference room, holding the photo in his hand like it might bite him. He'd never told anyone about her, not even his assistant, not even Caleb. But now, pieces were snapping into place, uninvited, undeniable. And then Julia walked in. "Morning," she said, blinking at his early arrival. "You're either having a breakthrough or a breakdown." He gave her a look. "Can you pull the HR file on Claire Evans?" Julia hesitated, sensing something sharper than curiosity in his voice. "Is there a problem?" "Just something I need to see." Minutes later, the files sat before him. He stared at her emergency contact information, at the blurry scanned photo of her ID, Eliza Claire Morrison. The name hit him like a punch to the chest. She had changed her last name. But not her eyes. He looked at her signature. It hadn't changed either. He remembered her once writing her name on a napkin in that rain-soaked cafe. "You'll forget me anyway," she teased. And he had. Or maybe he'd forced himself to. He closed the file and left the building without another word. Claire was in the back alley behind her building, sorting through empty flower bags for recycling when she heard the car. It wasn't the kind of place someone like Nicholas should have known about. But he was there, getting out of the car slowly, like he wasn't sure whether to come closer or run the other way. She froze. He took a few steps forward. You changed your name." The words landed like stone on water, no splash, just a slow sinking. Claire didn't respond. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photo. "This is you. From 6 years ago. Right?" She looked at the photo. It was old, worn, water-stained. Her hair was shorter then. Her face rounder, softer. She was smiling in a way she hadn't in years. Not since the day she realized he wasn't coming back. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, voice low. Claire set down the bag she was holding, her hands trembling. "Because I didn't think it mattered anymore. You thought I wouldn't remember." "I didn't want to be remembered," she snapped. "Not like that. Not as the girl you left in a bakery with nothing but a receipt and a stupid promise." He stepped back slightly, wounded. "You never tried to reach out." "I didn't know how. You left. You disappeared." "I thought it was just one night," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting you." She laughed bitterly. "No. You were protecting yourself. From the idea of wanting someone like me." He didn't answer. The silence between them stretched like barbed wire, long, painful, dangerous to cross. "I was supposed to get married, Nicholas," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I stood in a church in front of strangers and family, and I waited for someone to tell me I was enough. And he didn't. No one did." He looked at her like he had never truly seen her before. "Is that what this is about?" "It's about everything," she whispered. "About the night you left. About every man who ever told me I was too much or not enough. About me believing them." He took another step forward. "I never said that. But you never stayed." His face crumpled. "I was a coward." She nodded. "You were." They stood there, neither moving. And then, from the building's side entrance, Caleb appeared, holding a paper dragon he'd made in school. "Miss Claire," he said shyly. "I made this for you." She turned, her breath catching. The boy ran up to her and handed her the paper creation. "It's got wings that flap," he added proudly. Claire knelt, inspecting it with exaggerated seriousness. "You are an artist, Mr. Caleb." Nicholas watched them. For the first time, he didn't feel like the powerful one in the room. He felt like the outsider. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have remembered. I should have looked for you." Claire didn't rise. But she did say, "I don't need you to fix the past." "Then what do you need?" "I need to know that if I fall again, someone's going to catch me." Nicholas stepped closer, crouched beside her, and took the paper dragon in his hand. He blew gently on it. The wings fluttered. "I'm here," he said, so softly even the wind barely heard it. "And I'm not leaving again." She looked at him, tears in her eyes, but said nothing. Not yet. But something inside her began to shift, like the quiet cracking of ice before spring melt. She didn't know if she believed him. But for the first time in years, she wanted to try. And that was enough, for now. Claire stood by the window that night, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, untouched. The paper dragon Caleb had given her sat quietly on the table behind her, its wings still slightly bent from the wind earlier. Rain tapped against the glass, not fierce like a storm, but steady. Unforgiving. The kind that didn't want to be dramatic, just present. She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no either. Nicholas hadn't pushed her. He simply walked away after whispering, "I'm not leaving again," like it cost him a part of himself to say it out loud. But Claire didn't know what to believe. She had lived 6 years building armor around herself. Thick. Quiet. Invisible. She didn't know if she had it in her to take it off, only to be left cold again. She turned to look at the small photo tucked into the frame on her bookshelf. It was faded, the colors soft now. In it, she held a cupcake, grinning. Nicholas had taken that photo, once. Back when smiles had felt effortless. A soft knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, Nicholas stood outside. He wasn't wearing a suit. No umbrella. No driver waiting nearby. Just him, drenched, hair stuck to his forehead, his eyes swollen red. He held something in his hands, trembling hands. A shoebox. Claire didn't speak, but stepped aside. Inside, he placed the box on her table. "I didn't think I'd ever open this again," he said quietly. "But you deserve to see what I should have remembered a long time ago." She opened the lid. Inside were relics. A coffee-stained napkin with her phone number. A matchbook from the bakery where they'd shared their last meal. A single earring she'd lost, and he'd picked up. A photo of her, the one she never knew he kept. But what stung the most was a folded letter, never sent. Her handwriting. "I wrote this," she whispered. "I gave it to the concierge at your hotel 6 years ago." Nicholas nodded. "He never gave it to me. I didn't even know you tried." She picked it up, hands shaking. "Dear Nicholas, I don't blame you. You left quietly, and I stayed quietly. Maybe that's why it hurts more. I just wanted you to know, I wasn't looking for forever. Just honesty. Even if it was, I'm not ready. That would have been enough. Now I just want to forget what it felt like when you looked at me like I mattered. Because forgetting is the only way I know how to survive you. E." The silence in the room turned to thunder. Nicholas took a step forward. "I didn't read that until today. I didn't know you were trying to be forgotten while I was trying to pretend I never remembered. You hurt me," she said, voice cracking. "And I let it define everything. I know. And I don't know how to unlive that pain." "You don't have to," he said. "But maybe you can live something new." Her laugh was small, tired. "It's not just me anymore." "I know," he said. "Caleb." Claire blinked. Nicholas froze. "Wait, what?" Claire's breath caught. He stepped closer. "What do you mean? It's not just me." "Caleb. Is he?" The color drained from her face. She hadn't meant to say it. Nicholas stared at her, slowly piecing together what his mind was resisting. The eyes. The questions. The way Caleb had looked at her like home. Like instinct. "Is he my son?" Claire said nothing. But her silence was too loud. Nicholas stumbled back a step like he'd been struck. "Claire, why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know how," she whispered. "I didn't even know if I should. He's my child." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Yes. And in that instant, the world he built, billion-dollar boardrooms, six-figure decisions, forged resilience, collapsed under the weight of a truth he never saw coming. He sat down slowly, like his legs couldn't carry the moment. "How old is he?" he asked, his voice hollow. 6. Nicholas stared at the floor. "The math, it's exact." Claire nodded. "I didn't want anything from you." "But he deserved to know," Nicholas said. "I deserved to know. I was afraid," she choked. "Afraid you'd take him. That you'd do what you did before, disappear, or worse, try to rewrite everything." Nicholas looked up, eyes raw. "Claire. I would never take him from you. I just want to be there." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, but it didn't stop the tears. "I don't know how to let that happen." "Then let me show you." "Why now?" she asked. "Why is it suddenly different?" "Because I saw him draw a picture of a family," Nicholas said, pulling a damp paper from his coat pocket. "And I was in it." Claire looked at the picture. It was a crude drawing, in crayon. A tall man, a woman in a yellow dress, and a little boy holding both their hands. I asked him who the man was, Nicholas said. And he said, "That's the man in my dreams. He always finds me." Claire gasped softly, pressing her hand to her chest. "I think I was meant to find him," Nicholas said. "And maybe, find you too." She reached for the drawing with both hands, like it was something sacred. Something she'd never dared to hope would happen. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "I'll wait. I don't know how to let you love me again." "Then let me just stand beside you until you do." The mug of tea on the table had gone cold. But inside the room, inside her chest, something had started to warm again. Claire stepped closer, the drawing clutched to her heart. "Do you want to meet him properly?" Nicholas didn't answer. He just nodded. Because words, right now, weren't enough. And when Caleb walked into the room a few minutes later, holding a Lego spaceship, and looked up at the man sitting quietly on the couch, he paused. Claire crouched down beside her son. "Caleb, this is Nicholas. He's someone very important." Caleb tilted his head. "Do I know him?" Nicholas swallowed. "Not yet. But I'd like you to." Caleb blinked. "You look like me." Claire laughed through her tears. And for the first time, Nicholas did too. Nicholas sat alone in the dim light of his penthouse, the city blinking like a pulse he no longer followed. The glass of whiskey in his hand had gone untouched for nearly an hour, its amber color casting fractured shadows against the marble countertop. He had always been a man of control. Of structure. Of perfect presentations and well-rehearsed outcomes. But nothing had prepared him for a 6-year-old boy calling him the man from his dreams. It kept playing in his head like an old film reel. "I drew you before I met you." And then Claire's voice. Quiet. Fragile. But real. "Yes, he's your son." He exhaled, a sound more like collapse than relief. He hadn't cried in years. Not at his father's funeral. Not when his company nearly imploded. Not even when he watched Claire walk away from him on that rainy night with her wedding dress soaked and sagging at her feet. But tonight, he wept. Silent tears. The kind that don't seek attention. The kind that only come when something finally breaks open from within. He stood and walked to his bedroom, opening the drawer where he had kept every trace of her. It wasn't much. Just enough to remind him she'd existed. That once, he'd held something pure and had let it slip through his fingers because he was too scared to name it. A photo. Her smile, unfiltered. A note she once left tucked into his coat, "You forget your umbrella. So I'll be your shelter until you remember." And a little red paper dragon Caleb had left behind when they met. He picked up the dragon, his thumb brushing its wing. "I'm sorry," he whispered to no one. Morning came without permission. Nicholas left the office early, his assistant confused but wisely silent. He drove not to the boardroom, not to his usual meetings, but to the neighborhood Claire once mentioned during a quiet, nervous laugh. "I live where the taxis forget to go," she had joked. Back then, he'd laughed. Now it haunted him. He didn't know the address. But he remembered the donut shop she liked. The one she said made the worst coffee but had the best neon sign. It was still there. Flickering. He parked and asked the man at the counter if he knew her. The man squinted, then pointed across the street. "She lived upstairs," he said. "Moved out a few days ago. Had a little boy with her. Sweet kid. Talked a lot about dragons." Nicholas smiled faintly. "Do you know where they went?" The man shrugged. Said something about starting over. Didn't say where. Nicholas stood there, empty hands and a full heart. He looked up at the window above the shop. Curtains gone. The light off. He didn't expect a goodbye. But the absence still hurt. He returned to his car and found a crumpled piece of paper stuck to the windshield. It was a flyer. Community bake sale at a local school. Claire's name wasn't on it, but her handwriting was unmistakable in the margins, small, tidy notes about frosting flavors and allergy warnings. It was something. Nicholas drove there. Slowly. As if racing would ruin the moment if it turned out to be real. The school grounds were quiet. A few parents milled about, tables being packed up. And then, he saw them. Claire. Laughing, not the way she used to, but lighter. A laugh that sounded like it had been fought for. Caleb was helping stack napkins. He wore a tiny apron that read, "Assistant to the cookie boss." Nicholas didn't get out immediately. He watched. Claire leaned down and kissed her son on the forehead, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Nicholas finally stepped out, walking slowly, like he was trying not to wake a sleeping memory. Claire looked up. Her smile faltered, but only slightly. She didn't run. He stopped a few feet away. "I wasn't sure if I'd find you," he said softly. Claire nodded. "I wasn't sure if I wanted to be found." "I get that." Caleb noticed him and waved. "Hey. The dream man is back." Nicholas chuckled. "Yeah. I guess I am." Claire walked over, standing close enough for him to smell the vanilla on her clothes. "I came to tell you. I'm not asking for anything." She looked at him. "I'm not here to take," he continued. "I'm here to give. To show up. To stay." Claire blinked, a shadow of something old flickering in her eyes. "I want to be in his life," Nicholas said. "Even if it's just as someone who drives him to soccer practice. Or helps him build another paper dragon. Or reads him bedtime stories and gets all the voices wrong." Claire looked down at her hands. They were flour-dusted, shaking slightly. "I was terrified you'd want to claim him like a trophy," she said. "That you'd march into court and take him." "I don't want custody," Nicholas said. "I want connection." She looked up again, her eyes not hard but wary. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll wait," he whispered. "Until yes doesn't feel dangerous anymore." They stood in silence, the late afternoon light casting long, warm shadows. Caleb ran up and shoved a cookie into Nicholas's hand. "I made this one. It's kind of burnt, but it still has magic." Nicholas smiled. "Thank you, buddy." Claire watched them. Watched Nicholas crouch to Caleb's height and take the cookie like it was gold. Watched how naturally her son looked at this man like he'd always known he belonged. And in that moment, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe something better. A beginning. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked quietly. "Nothing fancy. Just lasagna from a box." Nicholas nodded. "It sounds perfect." Caleb hooped. "Mom's lasagna wins awards." They laughed, all three. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't wrapped in orchestral music or cinematic rainfall. It was just real. And after everything, the wedding dress, the silence, the time, they were finally stepping into the next chapter. Together. The scent of garlic bread filled the modest apartment, curling through the air like a memory long overdue. The table was set for three. Not with the formality of a mansion, but with the kind of effort that says, "I want this to matter." Nicholas adjusted a napkin awkwardly, then moved it back, then again, until Caleb scolded him gently. "Just leave it, Mr. Fidget. It's a napkin, not a science project." Claire chuckled from the kitchen. It had been 3 weeks since that first meeting outside the bake sale. Since Nicholas had stood there, open-palmed and open-hearted, offering nothing but the truth, that he was ready to begin, wherever she needed him to start. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't asked for time or titles. He simply stayed. And that, more than any declaration of love, had been what slowly rewired Claire's guarded heart. She watched him now, fussing with cutlery and pretending not to steal glances at the oven timer. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to earn his place in a world that had kept going without him. Dinner was simple. Lasagna. Store-bought garlic bread. A small salad Claire didn't bother dressing because Caleb insisted ranch was fancier. And yet, it felt like a feast. They ate. They laughed. They talked about nothing, school projects, failed recipes, a squirrel that had broken into the trash again. And somewhere in the middle of it, Nicholas realized something almost frightening. This, right here, was the most valuable deal he had ever negotiated, and the one he wanted most never to close. After dinner, Claire began to clear plates. Nicholas stepped in automatically, taking the heavier dishes. Caleb ran off to grab his dragon collection. He wanted to show Nicholas how he'd modified their wings for aerodynamic efficiency, a phrase he used with grave importance. As Nicholas rinsed a plate, Claire stood beside him, drying. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He glanced at her. The silence. The skyline. The big space with no one in it. Nicholas took a moment. "Sometimes. But then I think of how quiet that silence really was. And I realize, no, not even a little." Claire nodded. "Do you regret not knowing sooner?" she whispered. "I regret not being the kind of man who deserved to know sooner," he replied. She looked at him then, and for the first time in years, there was no sadness in her gaze. Only something steadier. Something softer. Something that might, in time, grow into the kind of trust that doesn't need words to stand. Later that night, Nicholas tucked Caleb in. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. "Want a bedtime story?" Caleb asked. Nicholas hesitated. "I'm not very good at those." "Make one up," the boy said, yawning. So Nicholas began, stumbling at first, then slowly building a tale about a lonely king who lived in a castle of glass and steel. A king who thought he needed gold to feel full, until one rainy day, he met a dragon who showed him that sometimes, all you need is warmth, a cookie, and a place to belong. By the time he finished, Caleb was asleep. Nicholas sat there for a moment longer, brushing the hair from the boy's forehead. Then he stood, closed the door quietly, and returned to the living room. Claire was sitting on the couch, a mug of tea in her hand. "Good story?" she asked. He smiled. He fell asleep halfway through the dragon's backstory. "He always does," she said. "You did good." Nicholas sat beside her, not too close. "Just enough." "I was thinking," Claire began, then paused. "About the bakery idea." Nicholas turned to her. "I don't know if I'm ready to go back to suits and boardrooms," she said. "But I am ready to bake again. Not for survival this time. For joy." He nodded, a smile playing at the edge of his mouth. "Tell me what you need." "I already have the recipes," she said. "I just need the place." "You'll have it. Not because of you," she added gently. "With you." Nicholas leaned back, letting her words settle into him like sunlight through old windows. Outside, the city moved on, horns, lights, distant laughter. But inside, it was still. Not the stillness of isolation. The stillness of peace. Weeks turned to months. Claire found a little corner shop with peeling paint and a stubborn door that never quite closed unless you kicked it. She named it Sweet Mend. Because some things break, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve to be sweet again. The walls were painted in soft rose and almond. Caleb had a designated taste tester stool. Nicholas installed the shelving himself, even when it took 5 tries to get it level. The grand opening wasn't grand. But it was perfect. A steady stream of strangers came in and left smiling. Claire baked like she was writing love letters in flour. Nicholas handled the permits, the budget, and most importantly, made coffee runs with extra whipped cream. One afternoon, a woman hesitated at the door. She was elegant, polished, the kind of person who used to make Claire feel invisible. She stepped inside slowly. Her heels echoed. Claire didn't flinch. "Can I help you?" she asked with a warmth that didn't ask for approval. The woman smiled faintly. "I heard this was the place where even the burnt cookies have stories." "They do," Claire replied. "And the messy ones. And the misshapen ones. They're all welcome here." The woman sat down in the corner with tea and a lemon shortbread. She stayed for an hour. She left with a box of cookies. And eyes that looked a little less tired. As the day ended, Nicholas walked in, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. "How was it?" Claire wiped her hands on her apron. "Another cookie miracle." He kissed her cheek. "Caleb's at his after-school club. I've got about 15 minutes to pretend I don't miss him." Claire handed him a cinnamon bun. "Eat that slowly and it'll last 14. They laughed. It was small. And soft. But it was the kind of joy you don't need to post online. The kind you keep tucked under your ribcage and call home. That night, Caleb handed Nicholas a drawing. 3 figures. One tall, one medium, one small. All holding hands. Underneath, in crooked letters, he had written, "My forever family." Nicholas swallowed hard. "You're really good at drawing." "I know," Caleb said. "And you're really good at staying." Claire reached for Nicholas's hand. He took it. And in that moment, nothing needed to be said. Because the boy who had once dreamed of a father had one now. Because the woman who had once been left behind had built something stronger than vows. And because the man who had once driven by a stranger in the rain now knew, love isn't about arrival. It's about return. Not to the place. But to the people. To the version of yourself brave enough to stay. And to the moment small enough to hold, but big enough to carry you forever.